Hello and welcome back to Pandemic Playground with Dave. Today, we have another episode of How to Space Engineers. And what we're going to look at is building your very first ship using the respawn pod. If you were going to build your very first ship from scratch, you're going to need certain parts. And those would be these: a cockpit, a thruster if you're doing a ship, but if it's a rover, you're gonna have to add some wheels. More importantly, a gyroscope, something I always forget, one or two depending. Some storage, medium cargo, or maybe a large cargo for any of your storage necessities. A bunch of small little blocks to make the design. Maybe even a landing gear to lock in the ship that you build. Definitely need a battery, one or two. And if you may want, maybe an O2 H2 generator. And also a ore detector, cryo chamber, maybe a parachute hatch, something I always forget. A survival kit if necessary, and of course some lights, so some spotlights or interior lights will do. So those are your basic needs to make your very first ship or rover. Some of these items are definitely not necessary. So as you can imagine, having all those parts put together, getting those parts may take some time, and it might be easier to use your respawn pod as your very first ship, or even a rover. Alright, to get started with the respawn pod build as your first ship or rover, there's a few first things that you need to do. And that is getting parts from this respawn pod itself, so you can start building certain things to start flying or driving in that sense. Of course, you can always grab some stone from the floor, put it in your survival kit, and produce such materials. But there is some limitations, as you can see here. You won't be able to make steel tubes, large steel tubes, metal grids, and other items as well. So, of course, what you want to do first is maybe open up the front, like so. Alright, so now you can easily jump right into your respawn pod in the back to kind of rearrange some things over there as well. So in order to do that, you also need to get rid of the seat and this landing gear, which is probably not connected anymore since you got rid of the seat. And in here, you'll see a few things that might not even be necessary anymore, or necessary at all for this first build of a ship. So number one is this parachute hatch. So you're not going to need a parachute hatch, which actually does have a small steel tube, which is something you can't create until you have an assembler. And you don't need this beacon, which also has a small steel tube. Timing block that's fairly useless to you right now, which can be used for parts. And very importantly is this hydrogen thruster, which has 4 metal grids and 2 large steel tubes, which again, you cannot make until you have an assembler. And to rearrange some things in the back, because everything's not connected properly, I will move some stuff too. So let me get rid of these things. And now this is what it should look like in terms of the respawn pod for your edits. So I think number one thing is to make sure to add back the flooring for this thing. You can do it with the same design as is, but what I'm going to do is just make it simple for now and add back with the blocks, light armor blocks here. That way you can put back your seat onto this flooring. Alright, so the next few things is to make sure everything's connected. And if you did want to continue using that small cargo, I would generally put it in the middle here or anywhere else that you like. But for the minimal way to do it, I would just start here, along with a small conveyor, and then also a tube that connects the O2 generator. So now everything connects into the survival kit. So let's weld that up. And now we have the O2 H2 generator connected to the small cargo container and also the survival kit. So that's the first few edits to make. And now we can put in a remote control block if we did not want to build it with a cockpit. So we build a remote control block. You want to make sure to put it in this kind of orientation. If you can't see it, you definitely want to make the orientation this way and not any other way, unless you do want to control your vehicle or ship in a different orientation. So generally, you would want it to put it in this fashion. Let me weld it up to show you and describe it a little bit better. Alright, with the green lit up box on the bottom, the two strips, and that curve, that kind of shows you that's the front. So it's going in this orientation, which is up, forward, backwards, left, right, up, and down. If you had another orientation, it's going to be a little bit difficult in terms of controlling it. So the next thing to do, of course, is put back the seat if you did not want to put a cockpit. Alright, seats back here. And now your first ship is almost ready, but you still need a gyroscope and maybe orientate your thrusters in different ways so that you can start flying it. So the gyroscope you can put anywhere. I generally like to put it up here for some reason. So I'm going to put that on. And I have enough parts to do so because it's going to require the one large steel tube that you cannot make just yet until you have assembler. But you got that from the hydrogen thruster itself. And it looks like I need some steel plates. So in order to get steel plates, it's fairly easy. We're just going to dig down, get some stone, and then put it into a survival kit for some production. So now you're pretty much done. And what you can do, and you may have seen me do this before too, in our experimental video, where we can now go into our remote access or remote control, hit control, and start flying this thing. However, with the default system itself, it is hiding some things and you need to turn some things on as well. So first things first, you want to make these things visible, which is lights, landing gears, and the atmospheric thrusters. And of course, you can turn these on first, and then make sure you group your landing gears so that you can easily unlock or have it on switch lock on your toolbar. Alright, so now I can unlock and start flying if I wanted to, which is gonna work, as you see here. But it might not be the most easiest thing to fly because you have no like forward, backwards, left and right directions. You only have upward direction. So you gotta fly kind of like a, I would say like a helicopter. And I can definitely fly this decently with minimal damage, where you have to lean left and right and everything like that just to turn. But you definitely don't want to have to do that consistently. So what you want to do, of course, is make sure you land and rotate some of these atmospheric thrusters. Alright, so that's all done. Now we have forward thrust, backward thrust, and right thrust. So we're missing left thrust. So in order to get left thrust, either you want to wait until you get an assembler, but if you're like me and don't want to wait for it, you want to grab your one of two atmospheric thrusters going upwards. Alright, so grabbing that, you can now plop on one for the left side or the right side, whichever direction you had it in the first place. Alright, so with that done, you have your very first ship using the respawn pod. And if you don't like your area, like you see here, and you want to get to a spot where there's ice, you now can fly there easily with all the different propulsions and directions, basically. So what I can do now, instead of before, where I would have to fly it in a very difficult way, I can now remote in, unlock landing gears, alright, so it has been a while since I built this, so I cannot fly with just one thruster going upwards, so you do need to. So the ideal one to remove is going to be the front thrusters or the backwards thrusters. So now I can hop into my machine, hit the control, and get out of here if I don't like my area and I want to go find some other spot. So now I can do left and right, up and down, and forward. Can't go backwards, but in order to stop, you can just tilt your ship just so slightly at an angle to kind of slow it down that way. So now I can find a spot where I want to land and start building maybe my potential for space. Alright, so that is a quick, easy ship that you can create to move on to a different area. But of course, you can build one with a cockpit. So in order to do that, you can just remove the seat and the remote control block if you like. And if you're kind of OCD like me, you would want to put a small conveyor here as well, just so that it connects to the cockpit. Very unnecessary. So now if you want to plop in this cockpit, it has the two little small connections I was talking about just before. So then we'll just plop it on this way and have it connected to the front. So of course, with this kind of build, you're going to need to make some displays and some additional parts too. So let's get that done. Alright, so now we have a cockpit, which sometimes I prefer the cockpit because it has a connector point here and it connects to the back. I can easily hop in. I mean, you're going to be blocked a little bit, but that's fine. But you can just make all these without an assembler. So now you have some storage and it connects from the front all the way to the back for, little items. And another trick to get more parts, instead of just, drilling for stone and putting into your survival kit, what you can also do is actually go to an unknown signal and take it apart. And sometimes you might get lucky, you get a large steel tube. Sometimes. It's kind of rare. Alright, so with this one here, you'll see it has an antenna. So that has a small steel tube right there, so it's perfect. The parachute hatch that has a small steel tube. And sometimes inside you get a decent amount of items too on the cargo container. Now we're going to just strip all this and bring it back with us. The preferred method, I think, would be the cockpit, so it's easier to control. So you have to keep going in and out of your control panel to hit remote access and hit control. So this way you just put on the cockpit, have it all connected to the survival kit as we did in the inside, the guts of the respawn pod, and you can easily just fly it around and search for your ideal spot to put on your base or start your base. Alright, so that's a quick way to make your first ship out of your respawn pod. However, you can do a lot more with the respawn pod given you have the parts and also maybe an assembler. If you want to build a rover, we can easily do that too. And to do that, what we want to first get rid of the landing gears. Alright, so in order to make wheels, we do need to kind of prop up the spacecraft a little bit. And to do that, it's something I showed you guys before in our How to Space Engineers episode 1. And that is using pistons. Alright, so once you have the piston on, you can put some additional blocks a little bit below it, just to give it a little more height advantage. And then extend the piston itself. And now you should be able to add wheels at the very bottom. So what I like to do is add it roughly here or even lower by 1. But generally I'll just add it right over here. Put one here. And I'll put it on the other side as well. So we'll put the left ones on first. And now we have a wheel on the left. And then of course I'll do on the right side as well. Add 2 blocks. And then add a wheel there. So now the piston is just long enough to make the initial wheel. So then you don't have to lift it up any more higher than that. So now what I would do is pretty much weld these 2 up if you have the parts for it. And initially you should have just enough for maybe 1 or 2 wheels fully constructed, because you will need small steel tubes and large steel tubes as well. Alright, so if you only have enough for 2 wheels fully welded, what you can do is actually make the suspension and the wheel in the back as well. But you want to make sure the front 2 are complete so you can steer. So if I were to hop into my cockpit and to go left and right, you see some steering at least. Right, so but you can't just drive it like that, so you do need to make sure to have the other 2 sets of wheels in the back. So we have the piston in the back. Now it's time to put it in reverse and now find the spot for the wheels. So what we can do is similar aspect as we did in the front. We'll put it in the back here. And of course we get rid of the atmosphere thrusters because this is going to be a rover, so we can scrap this for parts and you get your large steel tube and metal grid from it from there. Alright, so as I mentioned before, if you don't have the parts to weld up the suspension and the wheel itself in the back, that's fine because you can leave it as the skeleton and actually drive it from here. So you can actually start moving and it will help rotate a little bit. And you can steer it left and right. So now you have a rover where you can drive in most terrains, not all terrains, of course. and locate that area that you want to start building your first base instead of flying with this respawn pod as a ship. And of course, if you didn't have the parts to fill up the back wheels and the suspension, what you can do, of course, make a assembler. So you can make your large steel tubes and your small steel tubes. But if you can't do that yet and you don't have the parts, you can wait for the unknown signals to arrive, grab it, because it's likely going to have at least 2 small steel tubes. So you can build up your suspension. The wheels, you need large steel tubes, and of course you can find that from the atmosphere thrusters. So that's how you kind of make the quickest rover with minimal parts. And of course, one big thing to mention is if you do have progression on, it might be a little bit more difficult to do, but it is definitely doable. But if you're on a planet with atmosphere, sometimes I do tend to make the rover and then should probably find my first economy base so I can hang out over there for a little bit before I make my first base, or locate an area with ice, or find an ice lake to just start my base from there. And that's probably going to be another video in terms of how to get started. But I wanted to show you guys how to make a quick ship using your respawn pod, or make your first rover using your respawn pod. So again, this is minimal parts, easy to make, not the most aesthetic looking thing in the world, but with minimal parts, you can start traveling to start locating where you want to have your very first base. And of course, once you have your first base available, and that's where you're going to plop on the assembler, you can put on so much more thrusters for your first ship, and also to make this look a lot better if you're going to keep this as a rover. Alright, so these are the respawn pod modifications that you can make with minimal parts to make your first ship out of your respawn pod. So again, you have the remote control with the seat, you have the cockpit ship, a quick rover with 2 wheels that are completely welded and 2 that are not. And after that, you can always add in the drill. So of course, you can add in a drill for the rover as well, but it's a little more difficult to drill for stone with a wheel-based rover. But you can lessen the strength and height offset of the suspension to start drilling downwards a little bit, but it won't be too significant. As I mentioned before, these are not the most aesthetic pleasing vehicles, but they are functional, and this will really get you off your feet when you start your space engineers. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video, especially for those people who are just starting in space engineers and wanted to build their first ship or rover and didn't think about putting it together with their very first respawn pod or respawn planet pod before they started building their initial base. And of course, if you guys did enjoy the video, please hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and leave some comments for us as well. As always, thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.